My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 30 years old, and I run a professional cleaning business. Some might think of it as dirty work, especially my family, but I take immense pride in what I do. My company, Fresh Start Cleaning, which I built from the ground up 7 years ago, has grown into a thriving enterprise with over 50 employees and annual revenues surpassing $3 million. Yet, to my family, I've always just been the maid. This sentiment is particularly true for my younger brother, Alex. He's 22 and currently studying medicine at an elite private university where tuition alone costs $65,000 a year. For the past 3 years, I've been covering every expense that his student loans and scholarships didn't, since our parents couldn't afford it. I wanted to support Alex's dream, even if he never truly acknowledged the sacrifices I made. Lately, I've found myself thinking a lot about our childhood. I remember the day I first met my newborn brother when I was 8. I was sitting in the waiting room of a small-town hospital when my mother gently placed the tiny baby in my arms. "Danielle, this is your brother, Alex," she said, her voice soft and tired. My small hands trembled as I cradled him, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against my palms. "Take good care of him, sweetheart," my father added, his voice filled with a quiet plea that stuck with me. That sense of responsibility, planted so early, became the foundation of my life. Our parents worked tirelessly, my father in a local factory, my mother at a grocery store. We weren't well off, but they did everything they could to make sure we never went without. From an early age, it became my job to take care of Alex after school. I'd help him with his homework, make his meals, and keep an eye on him until our parents came home. We bickered, as siblings do, but we were close. Alex's dream of becoming a doctor started in the winter of his second grade year. He came down with a high fever, the kind that left him weak and struggling to breathe. At first, we thought it was just a bad cold. But late that night, his breathing became ragged, and he clutched my arm, his voice barely a whisper. "Danielle, it's hard to breathe." Panicked, I woke our parents, and we rushed him to the emergency room. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly as he was wheeled into an examination room, his small body swallowed by an oversized hospital gown. Severe pneumonia. He had to be hospitalized immediately. Our parents couldn't take time off work, so as a high school student, I skipped classes to stay with him. I remember sitting beside his bed, holding his hand as he lay still, an oxygen mask covering his pale face. "I'm here, Alex," I whispered, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "You're not alone." He was placed in a shared hospital room with 3 other children. At night, when his fever spiked, I'd stay by his side, changing the ice pack on his forehead and wiping away the sweat. One evening, I overheard an elderly woman in the room whisper to a nurse, "That girl takes such good care of her little brother." 3 days into his hospital stay, Dr. Patterson, a middle-aged physician with kind eyes, stopped by during his rounds. "You're doing well, Alex. You'll be better soon," he reassured him with a warm smile. Alex nodded weakly, watching him intently. "The doctor is really kind, but also strong," he murmured in admiration. A week later, in the middle of the night, a little girl in the same ward had a seizure. Dr. Patterson rushed in and immediately took control of the situation, his voice steady and commanding. I saw the way Alex watched him, eyes wide, breath held in awe. "Amazing," he whispered. On the day of his discharge, as we prepared to leave, Alex turned to Dr. Patterson. "Doctor, one day, I want to be just like you." Dr. Patterson chuckled. "Then you'll need to study hard, and remember to always be kind." "I will," Alex promised. "I'll learn from my big sister, too." As we left the hospital, he looked up at me with a newfound sense of purpose. "Danielle, I promise I'll become a doctor and help people, just like Dr. Patterson." That moment cemented his dream. And from that day on, I made it my mission to support him. To help with household expenses and save for college, I took on part-time cleaning jobs. At first, it was just a way to make ends meet. But over time, I realized something: I was good at it. Not just good, but great. By the time I graduated high school, I had built a steady list of clients. I went to college part-time, balancing my studies with expanding my small business. 7 years later, Fresh Start Cleaning was more than just a cleaning service. It was a full-fledged company with a reputation for excellence. But despite my success, my family, especially Alex, never truly saw it that way. To them, I wasn't an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, or a success story. I was just Danielle, the cleaning lady. And after everything I had sacrificed for him, Alex never once acknowledged what it took to put him through school. At first, I thought cleaning was an embarrassing job, something people looked down upon. But over time, I realized that it requires unseen effort, skill, and precision. My first job was at a small community health clinic. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, I would polish the waiting room floor, scrub the windows, and make sure the bathrooms were spotless. One day, the clinic director approached me with a kind smile. "Thanks to you, Miss Carter, our patients can receive their treatment in a clean and comfortable environment." His words changed my entire perspective on cleaning. It wasn't just about wiping away dirt, it was about creating spaces where people felt safe and cared for. "The place looks brand new every time you clean it, Danielle," a patient once told me. It was a simple compliment, but I still cherish it to this day. After graduating from high school, I joined a major building maintenance company. Cleaning, I realized, wasn't just a job, it was essential to people's daily lives. I was drawn to it with a sense of purpose. Over time, I learned not only the techniques of professional cleaning, but also the ins and outs of managing large-scale operations. By my second year at the company, I was entrusted with overseeing the cleaning of a large commercial facility. It was a massive responsibility, managing over 100 staff members and ensuring the entire building remained in pristine condition. The work was relentless. My shifts often started at 4 a.m., hours before stores opened, and continued late into the night. Sometimes, when staff called out unexpectedly, I had to step in myself, working overtime to cover their duties. There were days when exhaustion felt overwhelming, but I kept going, knowing that every spotless floor and sparkling window was a reflection of my team's hard work. The cleaning staff I worked with came from all walks of life: retirees, single parents, young workers trying to make ends meet. I admired the dedication of the elderly employees who, despite their skill, sometimes had to leave because the physical demands became too much. In the break room, I listened to part-time housewives struggle to balance their shifts with childcare. It was around this time that I began to dream of starting my own business. I wanted to create a better working environment, one where people weren't overworked and undervalued. "Danielle, you're really suited for this," one of my older colleagues told me one day. "You work diligently and notice even the smallest details." Encouraged by their words, I started studying business management in my spare time. I read articles about entrepreneurship during my breaks and attended weekend seminars on running a successful company. Slowly, my dream of building my own business became clearer and more concrete. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Alex, had entered middle school, completely focused on his goal of becoming a doctor. He was at the top of his class, constantly surrounded by stacks of textbooks and notes. But despite his determination, our family's financial situation made things difficult. We couldn't afford to send him to extra tutoring like many of his classmates. Alex, undeterred, pushed himself harder. He arrived at school earlier than anyone else and stayed long after classes ended, studying in the library. On weekends, he spent hours at the state library, buried in medical books. "You're working so hard, Alex. I know you'll become a wonderful doctor someday," our mother would say, her voice full of both pride and sadness. I was just as desperate to help. When he set his sights on an elite high school, I refused to let financial worries hold him back. "Don't worry, I'll support you however I can," I promised, using my own salary to buy him reference books and small treats when he looked exhausted from studying. The night before his entrance exam, I stayed up late with him, helping to ease his nerves. "Danielle, what if things don't go well tomorrow?" he whispered anxiously. I smiled and squeezed his shoulder. "You've worked so hard, Alex. You've done enough. Just do your best." The day his results were announced is still vivid in my memory. As we searched the list, his examination number appeared, and for a moment we both stood frozen. Then he turned to me, tears streaming down his face, and hugged me tightly. "It's all thanks to you, Danielle. Thank you so much." At 25, I finally made a life-changing decision. I resigned from my job and took the leap. I was ready to start my own business. I decided to start my own company. Over the years, I had saved $330,000 from part-time jobs and my work as an employee, desperately setting aside every dollar I could. When the time came, I walked into banks with my business plan in hand, hoping to secure additional funding. But no one took me seriously. The cleaning industry has too low an entry barrier. There's too much competition. Starting a business as a woman is still seen as a risk. The rejection stung, but I refused to let it break me. If no one was willing to invest in me, I would invest in myself. My first job came through an old colleague from my part-time days. She introduced me to a friend who worked at an elementary school that needed a cleaning service. The pay was low, but this was my first step towards something bigger. "Danielle, you clean so meticulously. We're grateful to have you here," the vice principal told me one day. His words led to another opportunity, an office cleaning job for a company owned by the PDA president. I worked alone from early morning until late at night, handling cleaning during the day and doing accounting and sales in the evening. There was no time for rest, but I felt alive. One night, as I cleaned an office, a young employee working overtime approached me. "Miss Carter, it must be tough working so late every day." I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. "No, I'm happy to be of help to someone." That small conversation led him to introduce me to his company's management, and soon I was cleaning their offices as well. Gradually, word spread and more contracts came my way. As the workload increased, I hired my first few employees. My company was growing. Then, one day, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Danielle, I got into medical school." Kevin's voice trembled with excitement, and for a moment, I could hardly breathe. His dream had finally come true. "Kevin, I'm coming right away." I rushed to the university during a break at work, and when we found his name on the acceptance list, we hugged, celebrating together. However, our parents' expressions weren't filled with just joy. "Medical school tuition is over $50,000 a year," my mother whispered, her voice unsteady. "We can't afford that." Before I could think, the words left my mouth. "I'll pay for it." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Danielle, that's too much for you," my father said, concern etched into his face. "It's okay. I want to do everything I can for Kevin's dream." Kevin burst into tears, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Danielle, I will definitely repay your kindness." Inspired by his words, I pushed myself even harder. I secured new contracts, minimized labor costs by taking on more work myself, and found ways to make the business even more efficient. One day, an employee approached me. "You're pushing yourself too hard. Let us help where we can." His words struck something deep inside me. I had been doing everything on my own for so long that I hadn't realized how much I could rely on others. Slowly, I started delegating tasks. The company continued to grow, and more employees joined. But in exchange, I had almost no personal life. I refrained from buying new clothes. I worked through holidays. My world revolved around keeping the business afloat and ensuring Kevin had everything he needed. Yet, whenever I saw Kevin thriving in medical school, all my fatigue disappeared. At least, that's what I told myself. Over time, our parents changed. The first sign came at a family memorial service. "Our Kevin has been accepted into medical school," my mother announced proudly to relatives. "That's amazing," someone praised. "How commendable." With each compliment, her face lit up with pride. Then an aunt turned to her. "And Danielle? She's still running her cleaning business?" For a moment, my mother's expression faltered. Then she responded vaguely, "Well, yes." My father changed too. At his weekly chess gatherings, he began to boast about Kevin. "My son says he's going to be a neurosurgeon." "Your son is really something else," his friends exclaimed. The admiration in their voices seemed to inflate his ego. One evening, during dinner, I mentioned securing a major new contract. My father set down his glass. Danielle, how long do you plan to keep doing this cleaning business? Shouldn't you start thinking about something more respectable? I froze, the words cutting deeper than I expected. Dad, my business is successful. We're growing every year, I said evenly. That's not the point, he sighed. You're smart. You could do something bigger. Something that matches Kevin's achievements. I forced a smile. I built this company from nothing. I employ people. I provide for myself and for Kevin. What's wrong with that? My mother finally spoke. We're just saying, cleaning isn't exactly prestigious. Prestigious. They were proud of Kevin, and I understood why. He had worked hard, and he deserved the recognition. But despite everything I had done, funding his education, sacrificing my own comforts, working myself to exhaustion, they still saw my career as something lesser. I didn't argue. There was no point. But something shifted inside me that night. Kevin flourished in medical school, but he changed too. His calls became less frequent. He missed family gatherings, always too busy. Then, at a family event, I overheard him speaking to a relative. Medical school is tough, he said, but it's worth it. I'll be the first doctor in our family. The first. No mention of me. No mention of how he got there. As if my sacrifices had never existed. One evening, I visited Kevin's campus. I had just signed the biggest contract of my career and wanted to celebrate with him. I waited outside his dorm, watching as he laughed with his friends. When he finally saw me, he hesitated. Danielle? What are you doing here? I thought we could have dinner. It's been a while. He glanced at his friends. Oh! I already have plans. One of his classmates nudged him. Kevin, who's this? He hesitated. Then, in a voice so casual it broke me, he said, She's my, sister. She runs a cleaning business. Not my sister who helped me get here. Not my sister who built her own company. Just, she runs a cleaning business. That night, sitting alone in my office, I realized something. I had spent years waiting for my family to acknowledge me. Waiting for Kevin to see what I had done for him. But I was done waiting. I knew my worth. And from that moment on, I promised myself I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Part of our lives, something that always brought us together, no matter what else was going on. I gripped my phone tightly, trying to process my mother's words. What do you mean I shouldn't come this year? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. There was a pause on the other end before she let out a hesitant sigh. It's just that, well, Kevin will be bringing Tiffany, and her family will be attending too. You know, they run a major hospital, and we want to make a good impression. It might not be appropriate if... If what? My voice sharpened, though I already knew the answer. Well, Tiffany's parents are from a well-respected background. They're used to a certain environment. We wouldn't want them to misunderstand anything about our family. I felt the air leave my lungs. And you think my presence would give them the wrong impression? My mother hesitated. It's not like that, Danielle. It's just, your work is a bit different, and Kevin is making important connections now. We don't want to risk anything that could. She trailed off, but I heard the unspoken words loud and clear. They were ashamed of me. I had built my company from the ground up, sacrificed my own life to fund Kevin's education, and worked tirelessly to give my family financial stability. Yet here I was, being treated like an embarrassment, an inconvenience to be hidden away. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I see. Danielle, don't take it the wrong way, my mother added quickly, sensing my silence. It's just for this year. We'll make it up to you later. But I knew there would be no later. This wasn't about one Christmas party. This was about how they saw me, how they had always seen me. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. I thought back to the nights I spent working overtime to afford Kevin's textbooks, the years I had put my own dreams on hold to support his, the countless sacrifices I had made. And for what? To be cast aside when it was no longer convenient for them to acknowledge me? The next morning, I made my decision. I wouldn't beg to be included. I wouldn't fight for a place in a family that only valued me when it benefited them. Christmas Eve arrived, And for the first time in my life, I wasn't at home. Instead, I spent the evening in my office, reviewing expansion plans for my company. While my family dined in their decorated home with Tiffany's influential parents, I was finalizing a deal that would take my business to new heights. At first, the loneliness crept in, but then, something shifted. I wasn't losing my family. I was choosing myself. Days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into my work with newfound determination. My company secured several high-profile contracts, and by the following year, Fresh Start Cleaning had doubled in size. I hired more staff, expanded into commercial real estate cleaning, and for the first time, truly allowed myself to celebrate my success. Meanwhile, Kevin became a full-fledged doctor, his future secured. Our parents basked in his accomplishments, and I kept my distance. I maintained polite contact, but the days of sacrificing myself for their approval were over. Then, one evening, months after the Christmas party, Kevin called me. "Danielle, can we talk?" His voice was uncertain. I hesitated before answering. "Sure." We met at a cafe near the hospital where he now worked. He looked different, older, more polished, but there was something uneasy in his expression. "I wanted to tell you that. I got engaged," he said after a long pause. I nodded. "Congratulations." He exhaled, as if relieved I wasn't making a fuss. "Yeah, thanks. We're planning the wedding for next spring. And, well, Tiffany's family is pretty particular about the guest list." I felt my stomach tighten. "So, what are you saying?" Kevin rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just that. Maybe it would be better if you didn't." I held up a hand, stopping him before he could finish. "I get it. Danielle, don't be like that." I stood up, gathering my coat. "No, Kevin. I really do get it. You've made your choice. And now I'm making mine." I turned to leave, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. Because I had already gained everything I needed, self-respect, success, and the knowledge that I didn't need anyone's approval to know my worth. Didn't feel the lump forming in my throat as I listened. Tiffany's mother had been a janitor, just like me. Yet, unlike my own family, Tiffany respected her mother's work, saw its value, and carried no shame about it. I clenched my hands beneath the table, feeling an unfamiliar mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and an aching sadness I couldn't quite describe. "Tiffany," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "thank you for telling me." She shook her head, wiping at the corners of her eyes. I couldn't stand by and let them do this to you. It's wrong. And Kevin," she hesitated. "I love him, Michelle. I really do. But hearing him say those things, I don't know if I can look at him the same way." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I wanted Kevin's relationship to suffer, but because it was the first time someone had truly acknowledged what I had gone through. "I appreciate it," I murmured. "But I think I already knew." That night, I sat in my office, staring at the skyline outside my window, letting reality sink in. For years, I had given everything to Kevin. I had poured my heart into helping him succeed, never once thinking that one day he would turn around and erase me from his life the moment I no longer fit the image he wanted to present. But perhaps the greater betrayal was from my parents. The people who raised me. The ones who had looked me in the eye, accepted my money, and thanked me for my sacrifices, only to now treat me as though I was something to be hidden away. I thought about the nights I stayed up comforting Kevin when he was sick, the years I had spent working to ensure he could chase his dream, and the countless times I had ignored my own exhaustion because I believed my family was worth it. And now, I was nothing more than an embarrassment to them. A janitor. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath. No, I was not just a janitor. I was a business owner. A leader. A woman who had built something from nothing. And most of all, I was a sister who had given everything, only to be discarded when I no longer fit their narrative. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not go to the Christmas party. I would not wait for an apology that would never come. And I would no longer spend my life seeking approval from people who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The day of the party arrived, and instead of standing in my childhood home surrounded by relatives who barely acknowledged me, I stood in my office, signing the biggest contract of my career. A multi-million-dollar deal with a major corporation that would expand my company to 3 new cities. I had spent years believing my worth was tied to my family's acceptance. But at that moment, I finally understood I didn't need their validation to know my own value. Weeks passed, and my absence at the Christmas party didn't seem to shake my family. No calls. No messages. Nothing. Then, one evening, Kevin called. "Danielle, can we talk?" His voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe near the hospital. He arrived looking sharp, polished, the very image of a rising doctor. But when he sat down, he didn't look at me right away. "I heard you weren't at Christmas this year," he started. I took a sip of my coffee. "I wasn't invited." Kevin flinched. "It wasn't like that." I met his gaze. "Then what was it like?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, it's complicated. You know how things are in medicine. Appearances matter." Tiffany's parents. Tiffany's parents? I cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Or was it you?" He hesitated. I didn't want to risk anything. You know how important connections are." I nodded slowly. "I do. And I also know that I made connections. That I built something real. That I funded your education while working twice as hard as I needed to because I believed in you." I leaned forward. "But I never once tried to erase you to protect myself." Kevin's jaw tightened. "Danielle, I never meant to hurt you." I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "Intentions don't erase actions, Kevin." He exhaled sharply. "So what do you want me to do? Apologize? Tell you that I should have handled things differently?" I stared at him for a long moment before responding. "No, Kevin. I don't want anything from you anymore." For the first time, he looked genuinely stunned. I stood up, grabbing my coat. I spent years giving everything to this family, believing that if I worked hard enough, I'd be accepted. That if I made sacrifices, I'd be appreciated. I shook my head. But I've realized something. I don't need acceptance from people who never truly valued me to begin with. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Danielle." I smiled, but it wasn't out of warmth. It was freedom. "Take care, Kevin." And with that, I walked away. Not just from the cafe. Not just from that conversation. But from the years of seeking validation from people who had never deserved me in the first place. I didn't hear their conversation at the Christmas party, but Tiffany had. When she told Kevin she wanted to meet his sister, he had dismissed my work, calling it embarrassing. He referred to me as just a janitor. Tiffany's tears spilled over as she spoke, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee cup. "I can't believe them anymore," she whispered. "People who think of my mother's job like that. I can't be around them." That night, I stayed late at my office, staring at my computer screen. The monitor displayed years of payment history, over $100,000 in tuition fees alone. Beyond that, I had covered Kevin's daily expenses, food, rent, everything. I had even taken out loans to make sure he never felt the weight of financial struggle. It was the crystallization of my sweat and tears. The city lights outside my window felt colder than usual. A janitor's sister. The phrase echoed in my mind like a cruel reminder of everything I had been to them, good enough to fund his future, but not good enough to be acknowledged. I was proud of my work. Cleaning wasn't just scrubbing floors or emptying trash cans. It was about creating spaces where people felt safe, comfortable, and cared for. It was work that mattered. But my own family didn't see it that way. Anger kept me awake that night. Sadness followed. Then, the next morning, a simple message arrived from Tiffany. "I've decided to break up with Kevin. I can't be with someone who dismisses my mother's life like that. Thank you for everything, Danielle." I stared at the words for a long time. Deep down, I had sensed this outcome. But I hadn't expected it to come so soon. That night, I made a difficult decision. I stopped paying Kevin's tuition. A few days later, the university sent a notice of unpaid tuition fees. Kevin's frantic calls came first. Then my parents. "Danielle, what's going on? Didn't you promise to pay Kevin's tuition?" My mother's voice trembled in panic. Kevin's future depends on this, she cried, while my father yelled in the background. But my decision was final. If having a janitor for a sister is embarrassing, then you don't need my assistance, I said calmly. Let Kevin find his own way. It'll be a good experience for him. Kevin called next. Danielle, please pay the tuition fee, he begged. Why? I asked simply. He was silent for a moment. I was wrong, he stammered. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Kevin, you were ashamed of my job, of my existence. But you still want my money. There was nothing more to say. Our parents called every relative, hoping someone would step in. But no one did. Kevin had become their golden child, and they had flaunted his success so much that the rest of the family had grown tired of their arrogance. No one wanted to bail him out. Eventually, Kevin was forced to apply for a scholarship and take a part-time job. A month later, he showed up at my workplace. He looked different, thinner, exhausted. But more than anything, he looked humbled. Danielle, he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I'm truly sorry. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. I applied for a scholarship. I started a part-time job. I'm going to finish medical school on my own. His voice lacked its former arrogance. Losing Tiffany made me realize. She told me how important and honorable cleaning work is. How incredible the business you built is. Someone who doesn't understand that shouldn't be a doctor. I listened in silence. I let success get to my head, he admitted. I thought entering medical school made me better than others. He glanced around my office. But I see it now. I see the people who work for you. The pride they take in their jobs. And I finally understand. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I stayed silent for a long moment before speaking. From now on, you stand on your own, I said. But if you're truly in trouble, you can come to me. Tears welled in his eyes. Thank you, but I'll try to do it on my own. That's how I can make things right. Months passed and Kevin truly changed. He worked part-time at a local clinic on weekends and tutored students on weekday evenings. Sometimes he'd stop by my office, not for money, but just to talk. He told me about his experiences in medical school, his dreams for the future. I want to open a clinic one day, he told me. Not just for the wealthy. A place where everyone can feel secure. His eyes no longer held arrogance, only determination. Even my parents changed. One evening, my mother called me, her voice heavy with emotion. Danielle, I'm sorry. For everything. And then, one day, a letter from my father arrived. Danielle, my daughter. I am proud of your strength. We were wrong. If you can forgive us, let's be a family again. I didn't respond right away. I needed time. But I believed that one day, we could come together as a family again, not based on illusion, but on truth. A year later, Kevin started an internship at a local clinic. Coincidentally, it was one that my company was contracted to clean. Dr. Kevin really understands his patients, a nurse commented one day. I watched from the hallway as my brother chatted with the janitorial staff, treating them with kindness and respect. He had finally learned the lesson I had known all along. Cleaning isn't just a job. It's a profession that keeps people safe. It's a service that supports lives. And it's something to be proud of. For years, I sacrificed everything for my family, believing that love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But I learned the hard way that real respect isn't earned through sacrifice, it's given freely to those who deserve it. I want to know, have you ever been in a situation where you felt invisible? Have you ever given so much of yourself, only to be cast aside when you no longer served someone else's needs? Tell me your stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same decision I did? Was I right to stop paying Kevin's tuition, or should I have kept helping despite the way I was treated? I want to hear from people who understand what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, or taken for granted. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: know your worth. We all have different paths in life, but none of them are less than just because they don't fit someone else's idea of success. My work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was meaningful. And no one should ever make you feel ashamed of what you do, as long as you do it with integrity. If you've ever felt belittled for your job, your choices, or simply for being who you are, stand tall. You don't need to prove your value to anyone who refuses to see it. So tell me, what would you say to someone who's struggling to stand up for themselves? What advice would you give to someone who's still seeking approval from people who don't appreciate them? Let's support each other in this space. Drop a comment below and let's talk.